What is it about abandoned places that pulls us in? Maybe it's the silence, the way every sound echoes like the building itself is alive. Or maybe it's the history, the idea that these crumbling walls once held laughter, conversations, and lives that suddenly stopped. Hospitals, schools, factories, houses, each one feels like it's holding a secret, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to step inside. And if you've ever walked through one, you know what I mean. The peeling paint, the shattered glass crunching under your shoes, the way the air feels heavy. Almost like you're trespassing not just on property, but on memories that don't want to be disturbed. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes these places aren't empty. Sometimes they echo with something more than just the past. That's what tonight's stories are about. We'll start with a group of teenagers who decided to sneak into an abandoned school, only to find out why locals warned them never to go inside. Then we'll move on to an urban explorer who thought he was alone while documenting an asylum, but discovered something else still living there. And finally, we'll step into a forgotten ghost town, where one traveler learned that abandoned doesn't always mean empty. These aren't just stories about places falling apart. They're about what lingers, what watches, what refuses to be forgotten. Before we dive in, if you love horror stories, mysteries, and the kind of chills that keep you up at night, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss the nightmares we've got coming your way every week. So grab your headphones, maybe dim the lights, and let yourself wonder, what's really waiting in the places we leave behind? These are 3 scary true abandoned place horror stories, and they might just make you think twice before exploring one yourself. That there's something about abandoned schools that feels different. A house can be creepy, a hospital can feel haunted, but a school is supposed to be alive with noise. Kids running in the halls, lockers slamming, the smell of cafeteria food hanging in the air. When all of that is gone, and what's left is silence, it's unsettling in a way you can't quite shake. And that's exactly what a group of kids in a small town discovered one summer night. Started as a dare. There was this old elementary school that had been shut down for years. Windows boarded up, grass growing wild through the cracks of the playground, swings creaking when the wind picked up. The kind of place you'd ride past on your bike but never stop to look at too long. Everyone in town knew the stories. Some said the school closed because of budget cuts. Others whispered about an incident no one ever explained. But if you asked the kids who lived nearby, they'd tell you the same thing: don't go in there. Of course, that only made it more tempting. So one night, for friends, 2 boys and 2 girls decided to see for themselves. They found a loose board by the back entrance and slipped inside. The air was instantly different. Heavy, cold, and stale, like the building hadn't taken a breath in years. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, beams dancing across peeling paint and broken glass. Desks were still scattered in some classrooms, books lying open as if class had ended suddenly and no one ever came back. One wall was covered in children's drawings, faded and curling, stick figures smiling under suns that hadn't shone here in decades. One of the girls whispered, "It feels like they just left, like everyone just vanished." They walked further in, every footstep echoing too loud, bouncing back down the empty halls. Felt wrong, like the building didn't want them there. When they pushed open the door to the gym, it was cavernous, their flashlights barely reaching the other side. They stood in the middle, looking around, when suddenly, footsteps. Not theirs. From the far end of the gym, the sound of shoes on the wooden floor echoed. 1, 2, 3. Slow, deliberate. They spun around, flashlights jerking in every direction. But there was no one there. "Did you hear that?" one of the boys whispered. Before anyone could answer, the heavy door behind them slammed shut with a deafening bang. They screamed and rushed to it, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in, hearts racing, breaths coming out in shaky gasps. And then, silence again. The footsteps were gone. When the door finally creaked open on its own, they bolted out into the hall. Trying to calm down, they ducked into a nearby classroom. Papers littered the floor, old attendance sheets scattered across a teacher's desk. One of the boys picked one up, brushing the dust away. His voice shook as he read it. The last date on here it's cut off midweek. And the names just stop, as if the school had closed in the middle of class and everyone had just left. Then, faintly, from the hallway, they heard it. Laughter. Children's laughter. But it wasn't cheerful. It was warped, distorted, like it was echoing from somewhere far away. One of the girls swore she saw a shadow dart across the doorway, just for a second. "Let's get out," she whispered. "Now." They hurried through the halls, but something kept pulling their eyes toward the principal's office. Its door was cracked open just slightly, and the window overlooking the hallway was dark. Until it wasn't. One of them froze. "Look!" In the window a figure stood. A shadow, tall and still, staring out at them. Adrenaline surged. They pushed the office door open, flashlights flooding the room. Empty. Nothing but overturned chairs and a desk covered in dust. The figure was gone. That was it. They didn't wait around to see what else might appear. They ran, crashing through the halls, scrambling out the same way they came in. The night air outside felt like salvation, cool and fresh against their sweaty skin. They didn't stop running until the school was just a dark shape behind them. Later that night, when one of the boys finally calmed down, he pulled out his phone. He'd been recording the whole thing, hoping to catch proof of their adventure. He pressed play, fast-forwarding through shaky flashlight footage and whispered arguments. And then he heard it. A voice. Not theirs. Not laughter this time, not footsteps. But a whisper, close to the microphone, like someone leaning over his shoulder. Said his name. He dropped the phone in horror, because at the moment that voice whispered his name, the footage showed him standing alone at the back of the group. No one was near him, and to this day none of them ever went back to that school. But sometimes, late at night, he swears he still hears that same whisper. Calling his name. There's a certain kind of person who thrives on exploring places everyone else avoids. The ones who slip past fences, climb through broken windows, and wander where the world has already moved on. Urban explorers. They chase adrenaline, mystery, and the beauty of decay. One of them was a man named Daniel. Daniel wasn't new to this. He had filmed in abandoned factories, half-collapsed mansions, even forgotten subway tunnels. But the asylum, that was different. The building sat on the outskirts of town, a hulking mass of brick and shadow. Locals swore it was cursed. Some said the patients had never left. Others said the doctors were worse than the illnesses they claimed to treat. Daniel, of course, wanted to see for himself. With his backpack, flashlight, and camera gear, he stepped through the gaping doorway one gray afternoon. The silence swallowed him immediately. Every sound, his boots crunching on broken tile, the click of his camera, echoed down the endless halls. The smell hit next. Faint, chemical, the ghost of antiseptic still clinging to the air decades later. He filmed as he walked, his flashlight beam revealing rusted gurneys abandoned in the corridors, their wheels frozen in place. Patient files were scattered across the floors, names half-faded, pages yellowed with time. Prescription slip here, a diagnosis there, all left behind as though the doctors and patients had simply vanished mid-shift. And then the first chill. Daniel felt a cold spot wrap around him, so sharp it raised goosebumps across his skin. He rubbed his arms, exhaling clouds of breath in the dim light. The air was dead still, yet he felt as if something had just brushed past. He pressed on. In one hallway, his light landed on deep scratches carved into the wall. Long, jagged marks, gouged into the plaster in frantic strokes. Daniel crouched down, tracing them with his fingers. They weren't the kind of scratches you'd expect from age or decay. They looked desperate, human, like someone had clawed until their nails broke. A shiver crawled up his spine. That's when he heard it. Footsteps, but not normal ones. They were slow, dragging, uneven, like someone was shuffling down the hallway behind him, one leg heavier than the other. Daniel froze, every instinct screaming at him to run. But curiosity kept him rooted. He lifted his camera, zooming into the darkness. Nothing, just an empty corridor stretching into black. Still, the sound continued. Shuffle, drag, shuffle, drag. Hello? Daniel's voice cracked in the silence. Is anyone here? No answer. He swallowed hard and kept walking, the footsteps trailing just far enough behind to make him question if they were real. Eventually, he reached one of the locked wards. The door was reinforced, metal rusted and bolted shut. As he lifted his camera to film it, the entire door shuddered violently. Daniel jumped back, the echo of metal rattling against its frame. The door shook again, harder this time, like something on the other side was slamming into it. He stumbled back, flashlight trembling in his hand. And then, just as suddenly as it began, silence. The door went still. Daniel's breathing filled the void. He backed away slowly, heart hammering in his chest. He wanted to leave. Every part of him screamed that he should. But then, the explorer in him, the need to document proof, pushed him further in. He set up his tripod in the hallway, pointing the camera toward the darkness. He left it recording as he walked ahead, narrating softly for his audience. The air grew heavier, colder. He felt watched, always watched. An hour later, shaken and drained, he finally left the asylum. He didn't look back. Not once. At home, Daniel loaded the footage onto his computer. He scrubbed through hours of shaky flashlight beams, crumbling walls, his own whispered commentary. Nothing unusual, until he reached the clip from the hallway camera. First, it was just darkness. Then movement. From the far end of the corridor, something emerged. Not walking, crawling. A figure dragged itself across the floor on all fours, its limbs jerking unnaturally, head lolling at an angle no human could hold. It crept toward the camera with sickening speed before vanishing out of frame. Daniel's stomach dropped. He froze, hands shaking as he replayed the clip. And then he noticed something else, something worse. As the figure crawled closer, his own shadow appeared faintly in the corner of the frame. He was standing there just down the hall, filming. And behind him, the figure wasn't in the distance anymore. It was standing, right over his shoulder. Daniel slammed his laptop shut, heart pounding out of his chest. To this day, he refuses to talk about that asylum. He deleted the video, stopped exploring. Some say he even moved out of town. But sometimes, late at night, he swears he hears it again. Shuffle, drag, shuffle, drag. Right behind him. The desert can be an unforgiving place. Vast stretches of nothing, where silence feels louder than noise, and the heat plays tricks on your eyes. For most travelers, it's a place you pass through, not somewhere you stop. But one man, let's call him Jacob, did stop. And he's never been the same since. Jacob was on a road trip, driving a back highway that cut through endless dunes and jagged cliffs. His gas gauge dipped lower than he liked, and when he saw a sign, faded, half buried in sand, that pointed toward an old mining town, he figured he'd find a station, or at least someone who could point him in the right direction. What he found instead was silence. The town looked like it had been swallowed by time. Wooden buildings slouched against each other, their signs too faded to read. The wind whistled through empty saloons, carrying the smell of dust and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. Jacob parked on what had once been the main street. He stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and noticed something odd right away. In the middle of the road, half buried in sand, was a toy. A child's doll, its porcelain face cracked but its dress still neat, as if it had just been dropped. A little further, a wooden toy truck rested against the steps of a crumbling home. Jacob frowned. These things looked untouched, not weathered by decades of desert sun like everything else. The air grew colder as the sun began to set. Long shadows stretched across the town, and Jacob realized how far he was from civilization. His phone had no signal. His car looked small and fragile against the backdrop of decay. Then, faintly, he heard it. Music. Piano. Notes drifting through the air, soft but unmistakable, carried from the old saloon at the corner of the street. Jacob froze. There was no power here, no people, and yet the music played on, smooth and deliberate, like someone practicing in the dim light. Curiosity gnawed at him. Against every instinct screaming to leave, he stepped inside. The saloon was dark, dust motes floating in the beam of his flashlight. Tables were overturned, bottles shattered across the bar. But in the corner, the piano stood tall. Its keys yellowed, wood warped. The music stopped. Jacob crept closer, his hand trembling as he reached out. He pressed one key. A sharp note rang out, echoing through the empty saloon. Then every window in the building slammed shut at once, the sound reverberating like gunfire. Jacob spun around, his flashlight jerking across the room. The doors creaked, locking him in. Panic surged. He backed toward the exit, pulling at the handle until finally, mercifully, it gave way. He stumbled into the street, chest heaving, eyes darting across the darkening town. And that's when he saw them. Figures. At first, he thought they were statues, still gray, half hidden in the shadows. But then one turned its head. Another shifted a step closer. Men in wide-brimmed hats, women in tattered dresses, children holding toys in their stiff hands. Dozens of them standing in doorways and alleys watching. Their faces were pale, features hollow, eyes black pits reflecting the fading light. Jacob's legs nearly gave out, but instinct forced him to run. He bolted down the street, past the church with its bell long gone, past the general store with windows shattered inward. The figures followed, not fast, not running, just drifting after him, their movements unnatural, like the town itself was carrying them closer. He dove into a small shack at the edge of the town, slamming the door shut behind him. His flashlight flickered. The shack smelled of rot. Boards creaked under his weight. And then shadows. They pressed against the windows, long and twisted, stretching across the walls. Figures leaned against the glass, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Jacob pressed himself into a corner, covering his mouth to keep from screaming. The shadows grew thicker, filling the room until it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. And then, as quickly as it began, silence. When Jacob opened his eyes again, the first rays of dawn spilled through the cracks of the shack. The figures were gone. The town was still. He ran, didn't look back, jumped into his car, engine roaring to life, and drove until the desert blurred into nothing but heat and dust behind him. He thought he'd escaped. But years later, Jacob still dreams of that town. Every night, he sees the figures waiting, their eyes locked on him. He hears the piano playing, the notes growing louder until they drown out his thoughts. And sometimes, when he wakes in the morning, there's desert sand on his shoes. Sand he swears wasn't there when he went to sleep. Abandoned places are supposed to be lifeless, empty, forgotten. But as we've seen tonight, emptiness isn't always what it seems. The kids who stepped inside their old school thought they'd find nothing but broken desks and graffiti. Instead, they found whispers, laughter, and something in the shadows that knew their names. The explorer who walked the halls of the asylum believed he was alone. Yet the walls told a different story. Scratches of desperation, footsteps that didn't belong to him, and a figure that followed him home, lingering in every frame of his footage. And Jacob, lost in the desert, thought he'd stumbled into ruins, a ghost town. But the town wasn't empty. It was waiting, watching, playing its piano until the moment he stepped inside. And though he escaped with the sunrise, part of that place never let him go. These stories remind us of something chilling. Abandoned places don't always stay abandoned. They hold onto memories, onto energy, and sometimes onto the people who never left. We think silence means safety, but silence can be deceptive. Sometimes it's not the absence of sound. It's the sound of something waiting. Waiting for footsteps. Waiting for a voice. Waiting for you. So if you ever find yourself tempted to wander into that abandoned house down the street, or slip into that crumbling factory at the edge of town, remember this. You might not be the only one inside. If tonight's stories gave you chills, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next nightmare we share. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever explored an abandoned place? Did you feel something watching you? Or hear something you couldn't explain? Share your experiences in the comments below. Who knows, your story might be featured in a future video. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and maybe keep your distance from the places the world has already left behind. Because sometimes, they're not as empty as they seem.